Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my efforts to improve the game that I created during the 30-day challenge, the game called Beneath an Emerald Sky. In the last video, I talked about most of the content of the testing passage, which simulates several runs of the game in order to gather information about which characters are more likely to win and which ones are more likely to lose. The only bit of that passage that I haven't talked about yet is the bit right at the end where it displays the results. This works fairly simply. We have a for loop that goes from 1 to 4. There are 4 different characters available, and for each one we just print something like character 1, the scientist, farmer, detective, etc. 1 however many times, 71 times or whatever it may be. And this, of course, is the point. So what were the results? Well, I simulated 200 runs of the game for each character, so 800 in total. And that really illustrates the value of programming this automated testing system. Trying to play the game 800 times and keep track of what happened, randomizing my choices each time, would have taken much longer than programming this system to do it automatically. It's not a substitute for playing through the game because there's a lot of things it can't detect. It can't detect when language is awkward or doesn't convey the meaning that I intended it to convey, or where a plot point doesn't make sense, or where a keyword doesn't seem to be doing what it should be doing. Those all need human judgment, but the thing that it does very quickly. So here are the results. The gambler won 71 times out of 200, the farmer 76 times out of 200, the scientist 62 times, and the detective 87 times. So we have 2 characters that are sort of in the middle, the gambler and the farmer. The detective is better, and the scientist is worse. And so, if we want the characters to be roughly balanced, which I do, then we need to make the scientist relatively better and the detective relatively worse. I say relatively because we don't necessarily need to make the scientist better. We could make everyone else worse. But however we do it, we want to bring their results closer together. There would be an easy way to make all of the characters entirely balanced, and that is get rid of their special differences. And I'm aware of the danger of sort of whittling down the differences between the characters, making the advantages less advantageous, the disadvantages less disadvantageous. Because, yeah, that would achieve the goal of balance, but it would do so at the cost of replacing 4 characters with sort of more like 1 character with minor variations. And overall, you want the characters to be as different as possible because you want the experience of playing them to be as different as possible because you want the game to have replay value, and that's one way to have replay value. So I've sort of set myself a rule that if I can do it in any other way, I'm not going to cut down on the differences. I'm going to add more differences. So I've thought about what can I do to make the scientist better? What can I do to make the detective worse? Well, I've come up with a couple of changes. These aren't the only changes that I intend to make, but they're the ones that are specifically to do with this balance issue. There is a point where every character except the scientist is freaked out by the plants in the jungle and suffers a loss of 1 willpower point, whereas the scientist, their scientific curiosity is engaged and they therefore don't suffer any penalties. And I intend to make the consequences of that worse for the non-scientist characters. Here's an example of how I'm not making the scientist better, I'm making everyone else worse, but that has the same effect in terms of their relative power. Instead of just getting rid of willpower, it will also mean that you're tired and freaked out the next morning, and therefore that you have a disadvantage in the first attribute rolls that you make that day. The way in which I intend to make the detective worse is when you're in the city, there can be a point where you spend a few weeks in the city learning the language, but it just says the next few weeks are really hard for you. It doesn't go into the details of what happened. And I intend to go into the details of what happened giving a disadvantage to the detective because of their suspicion of other people, which is something that I've already established as being their disadvantage. So, in fact, I'm making everyone except the scientist worse, and then I'm making the detective extra worse, which does accord with my feeling that maybe these numbers are a little bit too high, or maybe it's just easier to think of trouble for the characters, perhaps. I don't know, but that's what I intend to do, along with other changes. And I have run out of time for today, so I will leave it there for now. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.